endocrine system. If I would have a chance to go into the health profession, into the health field and medical field, I would either choose infectious diseases, which is obvious, or that would be endocrine system, because the logic behind it is fascinating and elegant. Endocrine system is not a system in the common sense of what we think of as a system. Like we think of skin and its continuous system, right? Integumentary system. Think the heart and blood vessels, its continuous system. We think about alimentary tract. Organs are kind of attached to each other. Endocrine organs spread all over the body, and which does not actually influence their functionality. Their main, probably the only function, is to regulate the body, along with the nervous, but they're very different. So nervous system, what are the mediators? How do we call mediators that work between the neurons in the nervous system? Neurotransmitters. They are local, right? One neuron releases neurotransmitter that acts on another neuron. Endocrine system is comprised of the glands that produce hormones. And we call it endocrine because hormones go where? The blood, within, right. Now you have to appreciate that pancreatic juice also stays within, but it stays in the lumen. It doesn't go into everything that goes in the blood is a hormone. If a molecule enters the circulation and affects function of other cells, it's a hormone. Of course, we're not, so based on that definition, there are probably hundreds of hormones. We're not going to talk about all of them, but we're going to focus on the ones endocrine system produces. So obviously, neurotransmitters act in the synapse. Again, it's a very local action. Endocrine glands, when they produce hormones, and hormones go into the blood, where are they delivered, these hormones? Where? Which part of the body? If they go in the blood, if something gets in the blood, which part of the body does it go to? Well, heart, everywhere. It goes everywhere, right? Blood reaches to all parts of the body, well, except epithelial tissue. Okay, but even there, hormones can diffuse. So this is the point. Hormones have systemic effect, unlike neurotransmitters. You see the difference? This is not systemic. This is local. But if you will scare me, hormones of adrenal medulla will have systemic effect on me. Neurotransmitters target, obviously, neurons, also muscles and glands. Okay? It's pretty much, we talked about the effectors of nervous system, muscles and glands. For endocrine system, it can be virtually everything, starting from hydrochloric acid producing cells in the stomach, ending with the cuboidal cells in the epithelium of collecting ducts in the kidney. Hormones regulate a huge number of physiological functions. Okay? Now, hormonal actions, can we control them? Can we control release of the hormone? Okay. No, we cannot. We cannot control how much thyroid hormone we produce or growth hormone. This endocrine system is, we can see the results, we can appreciate the results, but we cannot control the actions consciously. It's slow compared to nervous. but it lasts. That makes sense? You see how many differences there are. And those two systems, they actually complement each other. Okay. Now, what are the organs of the system? Give me 1 second. I will bring those models right here and we'll chat about them. So here are the primary endocrine organs. So what it means primary? Any idea? What would you think? I like the conversation. So, huh? Importance is the relative term. Huh? Again, depending on the condition, can vary. They will have the greatest effect on the body function. Again, it's debatable because it's subjective. It's primary. Now I'm gonna give you a hint. So it produces hormones. Does it do anything else? No. No. That's the primary. They don't do anything else. They don't have any other roles. Okay? They produce hormones. Make sense? Now, what are those primary endocrine organs? If we go from here, first is going to be hypothalamus, which we can't see. Ground here, can't even point at it. You see the little tiny dude, which plays a huge role in regulating endocrine system. Okay, hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is directly connected to hypophysis or pituitary gland, which also is located somewhere in the head. So you see those little two tiny yellow dots right here? Those are above its hypothalamus, below its hypophysis or pituitary gland. Pineal gland is right here, part of epiphysis. Again, in the diencephalon in the brain. And actually, you think about it. Now think about this. If this is close to the brain, probably there's some input from the brain, right? Turns out it's correct. There's some connection between nervous and endocrine system there. Then we go down and there's thyroid gland. You can see it right here. Thyroid. It's the biggest endocrine gland that we have. On the back of it, and I cannot show you because I don't think this model implies it, there are parathyroid glands. Okay, control calcium. We go further down, somewhere here, not on the model, is thymus. Very special, very specific gland that controls your immune system, controls the development of it, to say better. And then when we get to the abdomen, there are two adrenal glands. Finally, the adrenal glands here, you see those triangular shaped yellow things right here. Adrenal glands, we've already encountered them. They are part of they play a role in regulating bodily function by one branch of autonomic nervous system. Which one? Sympathetic. Speak up. Don't. Now, one little side note. I know, and I was like this. A lot students often don't ask questions because they think it's a stupid question. Well, everybody else knows that, and they don't want to look stupid, or they're embarrassed with something else. No, there are no stupid questions. Ask any question you want I promise I will never ever treat it in any humiliating way. Okay, whatever. I'll always respect your question and always try to answer it. Okay, and if I ask something, don't be afraid to make a mistake when you say things. You made a mistake, so what? Okay? It's lovely to have an interaction. So those were adrenal glands. Then you have pancreas. Right here. This is quite a unique organ. It has both endocrine and exocrine function. So it produces insulin as the part of endocrine function and other hormones, glucagon and I forgot peptide P, whatever. We'll not talk about it. And then finally, when we reach the inguinal area, the groin, there are gonads, testes in males, and ovaries in females, specifically speak. So these are ovaries, right, in females. So that's your primary endocrine organs. They don't do anything else. They actually produce hormones. Well, strictly speaking, ovaries produce hormones that are necessary for the maturation of primary and secondary oocytes before the fertilization. Okay, so testes produce hormones that are necessary for the sperm maturation. Does that make sense? So they do have some other functions, but it's kind of very tightly linked to the hormones they produce. Secondary organs, there are tons of them. Secondary hormone production is not the first thing to do. For instance, heart produces hormones. Hormone that regulates your blood pressure. Liver produces a bunch of hormones regulating the number of platelets in the blood and amount of iron, regulating iron balance in the blood. Kidney produces erythropoietin, the hormone that regulates the red blood cell production in bone marrow. Produces another hormone, renin, that regulates blood pressure. Okay, even your bones produce hormones. Okay, or calcin that has action similar to insulin, and fat. That's my favorite secondary endocrine organ. I don't want to spoil the party, so we'll leave it till we get to the fat, but it produces some fascinating things. Any questions? Sorry. Any questions? Yes. You absolutely must know primary because it's the closed list.
Well, did you want us to know each of what they affected, like you said?
We'll get there. Not yet. Of course, I mean, you will absolutely know the functions of testes and pancreas in terms of the endocrine system. But so far, like if you will get the quiz, say Monday, the only thing I can ask, give me the list of primary endocrine organs. It's a closed list. I told you everything, I promise. For secondary, you can consider other organs, like lungs produce some hormone-like substances, and so we can expand on it. But primary, this is what you've got. Know that. And I specifically used this model. It's easier when you have an association between the organ and where it is. It's kind of easier to memorize what they are and where they are. Now, chemical types of hormones, you have three boxes, okay. One blue, okay, this one, and a red boxes. Blue represent the water-soluble hormones. Red represent the lipid-soluble. There's a little statement, solubility defines mechanism of action. Now let's chat a little bit. How? How is that possible? Why there's so much difference in the mechanism of hormone action between water and lipid-soluble hormones? Let's do a deductive method, okay? Hormones. What do they act upon? Organs. What are they made of? You go too low. Organs. What are they made of? Huh? Tissues. Tissues are made of cells. Let's stop there. Cells. Can we say that hormones act on cells? Sure. They do. They actually do. How do they do that? Do they come and punch them in the stomach? What? How do hormones, how do chemicals act? How they change the cellular behavior? They diffuse into the cell and then do what? Ooh, I see where you're going. So I'm really happy that you remember about polarization, hyperpolarization, depolarization. They don't do that. They bind to something. When hormone binds to something, what do we call that something? Receptor. So they bind to the receptor. Now, Diane mentioned that hormones diffuse into the cell. All of them? All of them can do it? No. What? Huh? The other way around. Why? So we have fat and water soluble. Which molecules can get into the cell? Fat soluble. Why? Exactly, because membrane is the lipid bilayer, right? So only fat soluble hormones can diffuse into the cell and find receptor in the cell. Does that make sense? What about water soluble? What they are going to do? Where's the receptor for water soluble hormone? If they can't go in, where's the receptor? Huh? Yeah, that's going to be on the surface of the cell, right? On the membrane. They cannot cross it, so they have to get message through the membrane using receptor that's extracellular, right? So there are three major chemical classes of water-soluble hormones. Amines, like norepinephrine, you see the amino group here. Short peptides, oxytocin, hormone that regulates the uterine contractions. We've already talked about it. And protein hormones, growth hormone. So those are three types that you should know. Amines or amines, peptides and proteins that are water soluble. So they have to stay outside of the cell. Fat soluble, a steroid, like testosterone. Thyroid hormone, and eicosanoids. We mention them briefly, but not here when we talk about immunity. Okay, so I can tell you eicosanoids, you have to know this word and that they are fat soluble. They are actually result of metabolism of arachidonic acid, which is also a fat, long fat molecule. So thyroid, steroid, and eicosanoid are fat soluble, so they can get across the membrane, and they will signal inside of the cell. In this awfully overloaded picture, I'm not trying to scare you, shows you the mechanisms of the water soluble hormones. Now here's the thing. I'm going to walk you through this, and you will see that all of these mechanisms, you saw them before. It's essentially second messenger systems. Yes, it's all second messenger. Okay. Since we figured out that water-soluble hormones have to stay outside, their receptor is going to be on the cell surface. And behold, it's going to be G-protein coupled receptor. So you have G-protein that is released. We have G protein here, G protein here. Okay? So G protein is activated. And this activated G protein can then activate two molecules that are also on the membrane, either adenylate cyclase or adenyl cyclase or phospholipase C. I bet you've heard those names before. Adenylate cyclase will produce the signaling molecule. It's right there. Can you tell me what signaling molecule is that? CAMP, cyclic AMP. It's a pretty powerful signaling molecule that will stimulate a bunch of different processes in the cell. Okay? Phospholipase C will produce another signaling molecule called IP3. Okay? Now so this guy will stimulate kinases, phosphorylation events. Remember, we ran before into the proteins called kinases. What they do, they add phosphate residue. Okay, so here it is. Kinases add phosphate residue to the protein, changing its shape, changing its function. Does that make sense? Okay, phospholipase C, when it produces a IP3, IP3 will release calcium. When calcium enters the cytoplasm, things happen. Well, first of all, if you have release of calcium in the cytoplasm, what's going to happen to the membrane potential of the cell? It's going to get depolarized, right? It's not that important right now. Just, you see, it's already a profound change in the cellular metabolism, right? And calcium can activate other proteins. Now, third way does not involve G proteins. In this case, the kinase, same type of protein that's stimulated here, kinase is attached directly to the receptor. This is the signaling that such hormone as insulin uses. Insulin would bind to this receptor, to its receptor, and this binding will immediately stimulate the kinase that is called tyrosine kinase. It adds phosphate residue to the tyrosine amino acid in the protein. And proteins, you see here, proteins will get activated and will produce some sort of a response in the cell. Does that make sense? Now, let me, crap, I'm tethered. Let me show what I mean. One of the big features of that signaling. So, well, let's try to use our imagination a little bit. So imagine that I'm a receptor, okay? So I'm a receptor, hormone interacted with me. One hormone molecule, one receptor molecule. Now, G protein gets activated and then subsequently activates either adenylate cyclase or phospholipase C. And those two enzymes start to produce molecules CMP and IP3, and they go all over the place. Now, everybody else in this room are going to be some cellular proteins. Okay? Now, can you get activated by CMP, technically speaking? Probably yes. I mean, you're within the cell. You can get activated by CMP. Can Mackenzie get activated? Sure. Kelly, absolutely. So, one enzyme producing a bunch of signaling molecules will have an avalanche effect on the cell. Does that make sense? It is really like an avalanche. So hormonal concentrations in the blood that will induce certain action, that will have an effect, are very low. We talk about nanograms per liter. Really, really, really low. Does that make sense? That avalanche effect. Now, what another important thing about this is that this water-soluble hormones, they work through proteins. Sorry. You see what I'm saying? They really don't reach nucleus. In neither of those pictures, signaling must involve nucleus. You see what I'm saying? It's all through the proteins that are already in the cell. Does that make sense? Can it reach nucleus in the end? Can some proteins get in the nucleus and change gene expression? Yes, but it's not a necessary step. You see? Any questions on that? It's kind of a take-home message, and we're going to practice it after the break. I'm going to finish this and talk about lipid solubles. I'm going to give you sheets of paper, and you're going to try to draw the very, very basic scheme of what's going on. Really basic. Showing me your understanding of hormonal signaling. We'll give you about 10-15 minutes. Very basic, okay? So again, the key thing, receptors are on the outside of the cell, on the cell membrane. And signaling goes either through second messengers like CAMP and IP3, or by directly phosphorylating proteins in the cell. Why do you think I spent so much time on these three seemingly very fundamental mechanisms? It will be, some extent. Why are, okay, how many of you are in any type of like medical program, nursing, dental hygiene? I bet a lot, right? Many people. What you gonna do with people? When you're done, when you graduated, what kind of job are you gonna have? Care. You're gonna care about people, right? And those people are freaking sick. Can they have some sort of endocrine problem? How can we address this problem? By how this works and, you know, influencing the basic mechanisms. So when you see the drug that is GPCR, G-protein coupled receptor inhibitor, you now know what it does. If you see that it affects adenylate cyclase, you know what we're talking about. Does that make sense? That's why I want you to know. We talk about receptor. What happens if you inhibit the receptor? What happens if you stimulate the receptor? Because a lot of drugs are actually acting through the receptors by stimulating or inhibiting those. Lipid soluble. Much simpler, but in this case, nucleus is involved. First of all, can lipid soluble hormones diffuse through the membrane? Yes, they can. That's exactly what they do. They have lipid soluble hormone that diffuses in the blood through all the membranes into the cell. And then it binds to the receptor. Receptor at this picture is in the cytoplasm. It doesn't have to be there. It can be in the nucleus. It can be a protein molecule in the nucleus here. It's just one version of it. Does that make sense? Either cytoplasm or nucleus. So when hormone binds to the receptor, this hormone receptor complex either goes to the nucleus or already is there if the receptor is in the nucleus. Does that make sense? Hormone receptor complex will bind to the DNA and will activate transcription. What's the product of transcription of DNA? mRNA, very good, RNA. And then RNA is translated into proteins, and proteins will do whatever. Does that make sense? One of the examples of it is antidiuretic hormone. Stimulates expression of the gene responsible for gene produces essentially water channels, aquaporins. So when you're really, really thirsty, those aquaporins get into some parts of your kidneys and increase the amount of water that kidneys take from the urine. So when you're thirsty and dehydrated, your urine will be low in water, concentrated, and very little of it. Does that make sense? Because of the hormonal signal. That's your lipid-soluble. They work through DNA stimulation, binding to DNA. They must do that. Not only, as we will chat about it, they have some extra genetic activities, but mostly through this. We'll talk about this and then we'll continue with it. We'll take a little break. Now, what are the signals for the production of the hormones? What makes us producing hormones? I just gave an example with being dehydrated. What does that mean, being dehydrated? Why? Yes. It is a stimulus when you dehydrate it. Yes. What happens to electrolytes concentration in your extracellular fluid? When you dehydrate it, the concentration of salts in extracellular fluid goes up or down? Up, right? Look, you have water solution of salts. You take some water out. Salt concentration goes up. Does that make sense? This is called humoral regulation. Changes in the extracellular fluid. Other example, what else? When you eat, the level of this molecule in your blood goes up, bless you. You eat like something sweet. Huh? Why? Because what before went up? Sugar, glucose, yes. Again, it's a humoral regulation. Glucose in blood went up, insulin went up. Any changes in the blood or extracellular fluid concentrations of ions, well, not any, but ions, chemicals, will trigger the hormone production. That makes sense? So that's one possibility, altering extracellular fluid. Another one is the neural stimulus. Adrenal medulla. When you have sympathetic stimulation of adrenal medulla, you produce hormones, epinephrine and norepinephrine, that are released in the blood. Simple? We talked about it in AP1, right? Now, a little less familiar thing. If I will turn off the lights in this room, okay, let me put it this way. When you sleep, do you have lights on or off? You ever ask yourself why? You know, there's a recommendation before you go into sleep, you should not look at this lightened screen for about like 1 hour, 2 hours before you go to sleep. Read a book, something without light. Have asked yourself why? How do you let you know? Like, hey dude, it's night, or how do they do that? Optic nerve, which, have you heard about a hormone called melatonin? It's actually one of the few things that you can buy in that fancy schmancy parts of the drugstores and other stuff that sell snake oil. Melatonin actually works. It really does. So what happens is, when there's light, the optic nerve goes into the suprachiasmatic nucleus, I think, of hypothalamus, and sends signal to inhibit melatonin synthesis in the pineal gland. Once the light is off, there's no signal from the cones to the epithalamus. Melatonin gets produced, you fall asleep. Like if you take melatonin before you go to sleep, you sleep really, really well. It is actually recommended to take it when you fly long distance to avoid jet lag. Well, not going to avoid it, but you're going to minimize it. Now, that's neural stimulus. And finally, hormonal stimulus. One hormone may stimulate the production of another. We're especially going to notice it in so-called hormonal axis. For instance, hormone produced by your hypothalamus, thyrotropin stimulating hormone. No, wait. Yes, thyrotropin stimulating hormone will stimulate thyrotropin produced by your hypophysis. Okay, so thyrotropin stimulating hormone will stimulate thyrotropin from hypophysis, which will stimulate thyroid hormone from the thyroid gland. So you see there's axis. There are three main hormonal axes: hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal, and hypothalamus, pituitary, gonadal, HPT, HPA, and HPG axis. And they work in a similar fashion and regulate in a similar way. Okay, and it's just, I give you an overview so we're going to talk about more details after the break. Now we're going to go to the break,